Hi, my name is Karl Zelik. I'm the Chief Scientific Officer at HeroWear. I've been doing research and development on exoskeletons and other wearable technologies for the last 15 years, and a lot has changed. There's been a lot of progress made in the field, and I'm honored to give this presentation today as a part of this year's Wearable Robotics Association conference, specifically to discuss user acceptance, which I believe is currently the number one barrier to widespread exoskeleton use. Before I get started, I want to acknowledge that I have a couple of affiliations, one with HeroWear, one as an engineering professor at Vanderbilt University. For today's presentation, I'm just going to be wearing my HeroWear hat and discussing the topic of user acceptance and what we've learned from implementing exoskeletons in a number of different industries. I like to start my talks by just telling you up front what the main takeaways are. So the things I hope you learn today are first and foremost that high user acceptance of exos is possible, and it can be repeatable if you get three things right and accept one hard truth. So first, I want to talk about an important and under-discussed topic, something that has a deep impact on many of our lives. For some people, this has gotten you out of a difficult or stinky situation, and I'm, of course, talking about the miracle of Febreze. Okay, so I think everyone probably knows what Febreze is. It's an odor eliminating spray that's used on fabrics like clothes. It works by trapping odor molecules inside these donut-shaped chemical compounds. And it's actually a fascinating science, but I don't want to talk to you today about the science of Febreze. I want to share with you the story about how Febreze almost never came to be, but then eventually achieved user acceptance and why this is relevant to the exo industry. So it began back in 1993. There was this chain smoking chemist who worked at Procter & Gamble who was experimenting with these chemical substances in his lab. And he went home one day and his wife asked, "Hey, did you stop smoking?" And he said no. And this happened a few days in a row. And he eventually realized that the chemical compounds he was working with in the lab were trapping the odors. And he ended up taking this to the Procter & Gamble executives, and they were blown away. They saw this as a huge opportunity to create a new line of products, something with big market potential, more than just an air freshener. So over the next couple of years, they delved into the science. They were able to demonstrate that this was feasible chemical to operationalize and use to eliminate odors in different fabrics, that it worked for different odors, and they showed it was repeatable. Okay. Then they did an initial launch in 1996, and a few people bought the product, showing that user acceptance was feasible, it was possible, but overall it fell flat. Febreze did not take off, and they didn't understand why. And it took them another 2 years to figure out how to achieve high and repeatable user acceptance, and when it did, the product took off. They sold $100 million worth of Febreze in 1998. So it turns out the breakthrough came from deeply understanding user needs. They figured out that they just needed to make one small change to the product, and they needed to tweak how they were communicating the value proposition. And then the floodgates opened. So how is this relevant to the exoskeleton field? Well, I think as a field, many of us have been trying to crack the high and repeatable user acceptance barrier for the last few years. And we often feel like we're on the brink. Many of us probably feel the way that the Procter & Gamble execs did back in 1996. There's a lot of people that come back to this conference and other similar conferences focused on exoskeletons who believe this technology has a place in society that can have a major impact, for instance, on worker health and well-being. But we all want to know, when will exos take off? Will they take off? When will they get to the point of repeatable and high user acceptance? I'm fully convinced that they will, and a big reason for my optimism is because of what I've seen in our own exosuit implementations and field studies over the last couple of years. As of 2022, HeroWear, we feel like we figured out the final pieces that allow us to break through this user acceptance barrier. We're now seeing high and repeatable user acceptance with the Apex, and I want to share some of those learnings in the hopes that other people who are implementing and or developing exos can benefit. So here's the outline of the talk today. I'm going to start with where we are now, then talk about how this started when we released the product in 2020, how specifically we define and measure user acceptance, and then what's next with Apex 2. So first, let me just quickly cover the science. We've demonstrated the feasibility of these passive elastic exosuits over the last few years. This started with a number of different research studies out of Vanderbilt University. And honestly, a lot of the even more foundational scientific evidence goes back even further. Over the last 6 years, we've completed a number of studies showing that the apex can reduce back muscle strain, can reduce muscle fatigue, can reduce spine compression forces. And these findings have been replicated in third-party independent studies. So we feel really confident about the biomechanical and short-term efficacy of these systems. The devices are doing what they're supposed to do. They're able to offload and reduce strain and reduce wear and tear on the back and other parts of the bodies of users. We've also seen corroboration from tracking workers over longer durations. So here is data from 154 workers who wore the apex daily for weeks or months, typically about 1 to 2 months. On the left are plots of self-reported effort. And what we see is that workers are reporting about 20 to 30% less effort at work to do the same jobs, meaning more energy at the end of the day. On the right, we see self-reported work-related discomfort scores. And again, we see about 30 to 40% reductions in work-related back discomfort and also in discomfort in the shoulders and knees and other parts of the body. In terms of user acceptance, for any device, you first have to show feasibility before you can show repeatability. So in 2020 and 2021, we've seen a number of exemplary users. These are people we can point to and say, hey, for at least for this person or this subset, they've been using the exosuit regularly in their jobs and they find value in it. This is one of my favorite examples. This is a vineyard worker from Australia. He's put thousands of hours of use into his apex, and he reports dramatic improvements in his comfort, more energy at the end of the day, improved productivity, improved sleep. And so we see examples like this, at least as demonstrations that this capability, this type of device that we're providing, has the potential to impact workers. But anecdotes and testimonials are one thing, as we all know, and repeatable user acceptance is another. And so it took us a while to get there, but as of 2022, we are now seeing consistent and repeatable user acceptance of the apex on the order of 70 to 80%. Okay? And I'll define precisely how we calculate this later in the presentation. When I say repeatable, this is an example of what I mean. We recently had a field study with a manufacturing client at 6 sites. So this is 6 different cities. 5 of those 6 sites were successful. They had average user acceptance rates of 80%. At each individual site, that ranged anywhere from 60% to 100%. And there was 1 site that was not successful. So we're not talking about claiming perfection, but we are talking about sufficiently high user acceptance rates that we believe exos can be scaled and rolled out broadly. Let's take a step back and talk about where this started. We launched the Apex One in 2020, early in the pandemic, and we were mostly restricted to online remote training. It took us time to learn how to best implement these technologies for different organizations and different industries. There were a lot of growing pains. Part of the challenge, and it was a good problem to have, but part of the challenge is that we had a lot of interest from different industries, from logistics and retail, manufacturing, defense, agriculture, construction, just to name a few. And each of them had different constraints, different needs. So in 2020 and 2021, it may not be surprising that our user acceptance rates were all over the map. Here's one example from a pilot test we did with a manufacturing client, where we saw 83% user acceptance. They had a really great safety culture, a good support system from their management. The management team encouraged use of the suit from their workers, and supervisors worked with the team members anytime issues arose. We had another example also in manufacturing where we saw much worse results, 33% user acceptance. Workers reported heat issues, there were limited use cases for the device, and some individuals reported discomfort due to pressure points, particularly around the front of the armpit area. We had to learn from a lot of mistakes that we made. Here's a few of the common ones. Early on, we were trying to provide implementation information to clients, but we learned over time that really partnering with them and encouraging them to engage with us to help develop a plan specifically for their organization was the best way to implement these suits. We emphasized the importance of upfront training, but didn't always emphasize enough the importance of sustained support. As with any tool or piece of equipment that's introduced, or any personal protective equipment, there's a need to provide continued oversight and support for these tools that are used regularly in the workforce. And then finally, there were times where we did field studies with just too few workers, where companies just wanted to get a sense for the technology, but they weren't deployed amongst a large enough number of workers to get a representative idea of what workers really thought. Clients also made mistakes, things like insufficient organization or planning or communication, or lack of management support or engagement were common areas that undermined and reduced the likelihood of successful field studies. The truth is there's no shortcut. I mean, we spent a lot of time with users and implementers. We collected a huge amount of customer feedback. We improved the product and our own implementation support, and we defined and tracked user acceptance. The payoff came in 2022 when we feel like we hit our stride and we were able to achieve high and repeatable user acceptance. If I were to summarize the three things that are needed to achieve this, it's comfort, assistance, and ease of use. If you're a developer of occupational exos, these are the three things that you need to get right in order to achieve user acceptance. And if you're a company or researcher, these are the categories I think you need to be evaluating if you care about user acceptance. Now for the hard truth. As of today in 2023, exos are a product and a service, not just a hardware product. And to address each of these categories on the left, you really need to think about and think through the lens of both product and service. So let me give you an example. When I talk about comfort, that is a category. It includes physical comfort, thermal comfort, psychosocial comfort, freedom of movement. Everyone knows about things like physical comfort and freedom of movement. They know why these are important. I think as an exo field, we have largely overlooked thermal comfort, but this is actually one of the biggest barriers to exo adoption currently. And there's a growing awareness of social or psychosocial comfort. So for instance, imagine you are at work, or imagine you're at a conference with 100 people, and I give you a Halloween costume and ask you to wear it for the entire day. Okay. For many people, this creates unwanted social attention and pressure and anxiety. But if I were to give you that same Halloween costume on Halloween and other people were wearing costumes, you would feel much more at ease. And so the same thing can happen with exoskeletons. If you give a single worker or two workers a device and don't understand the cultural effects, there can be additional friction and barriers to acceptance. So when we think about comfort, we think about that from the product side. We try to create exosuits that are lightweight, that use soft and flexible materials, that have modular adjustable designs to fit men and women of different body sizes and shapes. We also think about it from the service or implementation side. So we have a sizing guide, we include training, we have optional on-site support. These help ensure that workers are getting the right size suit and that it fits them in an appropriate way to provide them maximal comfort as well as support. We also recommend the size of pilots to help get around some of the friction associated with social comfort. And we have check-ins early in usage to make sure that the fit isn't just good at the beginning, but maintains a good fit and a comfortable fit throughout the device's use. As we've gotten into Apex 2, and I'll talk more about this later in the presentation, we really doubled down on these areas. We tried to retain the core functionality in terms of assistance, in terms of mode switching, but really improve thermal and physical comfort and scalability of the device, as well as ease of use. I'll talk more about these, but adding a ventilated back panel and features to the device to the product level that enhance thermal comfort or help and change the shape of the strap to improve physical comfort. These are examples of improvements on the product side. And then on the service side, we've also introduced Exo as a service for select clients, which helps to ensure that it's as easy as possible for workers to have the most comfortable and best fitting device for their body. So let's talk about user acceptance. What does it mean to us? How do we define it? How do we track it? First, our definition of user acceptance and what our clients want to know is what percentage of users are wanting or willing to wear an Apex after 3 to 6 weeks of use. So why 3 weeks? Well, we found that in a number of field tests, a large number of field tests, we found that in worker surveys, they generally don't change much after about 2 weeks of use. And we had one additional week that allows us to ramp up and provides kind of a buffer to bring everyone on board. The 6 weeks maximum is because many of our field studies run for 6 weeks. So we take our user acceptance surveys and our user acceptance data at the end of that field trial. I'm not going to go through all the evidence behind the stability of our surveys after 2 weeks. We've presented this at some other conferences. Other folks, such as this is Dave Brody from Cargill, who did an independent trial, Also found similar results. These are bar plots of self-reported worker comfort at a baseline, so before using the suit in blue, and then what they report in terms of their effort or reductions in effort while wearing the Apex after 2 weeks and 4 weeks, 6 weeks. We've gone out further, 8 weeks, 10 weeks, 12 weeks. But at least for our device, we found stability after about 2 weeks. This may not be true for all exoskeletons. It's going to depend on ease of use and complexity. It may take longer for certain devices to get to the point where they achieve these stable surveys. But at least for us, as long as we check in after about 2 to 3 weeks, we have confidence that we're getting a good reflection of what workers think. When I say the term field studies, and when I say we measure user acceptance in field studies, really what I mean is we just put exosuits on actual workers and we send them back to their jobs for weeks or months. Which customers do field studies? Well, we sell exosuits to various different clients. We sell them to individuals, to research teams, to small businesses, to large and enterprise businesses, some of which do field studies, meaning they use our surveys. And some enterprise clients do their own evaluations. They use their own outcome metrics. So within the group of companies that use our field study surveys, there is a subset that has opted in for their data to be de-identified and pulled together. And that's the data I'll be sharing with you today. How large are field studies? Well, we generally recommend about 10 to 15% of a facility's workforce. So if you have a facility with 200 workers, that would be 20 to 30 workers wearing suits. How large is this? It really varies by client. It's often between about 10 and 50 workers per location. Sometimes it's larger, sometimes it can be a little bit smaller. And these field studies typically run for 4 to 6 weeks. How do they actually work? Well, customers purchase their own exosuits. HeroWear provides the training, the surveys, and the support. Workers volunteer to participate, and neither the company nor the workers are compensated for their participation to avoid biasing the survey results. There's typically 3 goals for field studies. It's to determine if the Apex users feel assisted, if the Apex fits into their daily workflow, and then finally, and the focus of this talk, is to determine if users are interested in continuing to use the suit at work. Typical field study looks like this. There's a preparation period where our team, our implementation specialists, are working closely with the client to help set them up for success. They're identifying volunteers. They're doing baseline surveys to understand the physical demands and the work-related discomfort at a baseline level. And then there's a kickoff where workers are fit and trained to use the suits. There's a 3-week survey about halfway through, and then a final survey at 3 to 6 weeks. I want to emphasize, even though this is a set of steps, underlying this, really the key is clear communication, organization, and planning, and an implementation specialist who has successfully implemented exos before. This is typically needed with organizations who have not already successfully implemented exoskeletons. Our team has gotten really good at this, at working with different organizations of different sizes and different industries to help ensure that really the rollout is right for them. Equally important is supportive and engaged management. Ultimately, companies are going to need to own and lead their own programs, whether it's equipment or tools or personal protective equipment, and exoskeletons are no different. So here's an example of one field study we did with a retail and logistics company related to the first goal of whether the Apex users felt assisted. We collected data. So this is after 6 weeks of use. We found that these workers reported 30 to 45% less effort at work, again, more energy at the end of the day. And they also reported 60 to 80% reductions in discomfort in their back, in their shoulders, in their hips, their knees. And so this was a really great use case where workers were seeing large assistive benefits from the suit. Second goal is to determine if the suit fits into their daily workflow. We have a couple different survey questions that help us understand this. One asks whether the exosuit allows workers to move comfortably within their normal range of motion. The other asks whether they're able to perform all of their work tasks. And what we saw in this particular field study is that overall, in general, most workers were positive in both of these survey categories. They were able to move comfortably, and they were generally able to do all of their tasks. And then finally, we assessed user acceptance. We asked workers whether they intend to continue using the device. If they agree, those are the green responses. That means that they want to keep using the device beyond 6 weeks. If they're neutral, those are gray responses. They don't have strong positive or negative feelings towards the device. And neutral is the way I feel about hard hats. I don't get excited to wear them, but I understand the safety value of them, and I'm willing to wear them when they're provided. And then red, although it doesn't appear here, any red responses would mean they disagree, that they do not want to continue to use the exosuit after 6 weeks. So here's how we calculate user acceptance. Again, this is data pulled from multiple different field studies. You're going to see data from a total of 231 unique workers. And this is, again, the subset of clients who opted to share their data. So of the 231 workers, 149, about 70%, finished the study, meaning that they wore the Apex for the entire 6 weeks. Of this group, the vast majority, 129, were wanting or willing to keep wearing the Apex, and 20 did not want to keep wearing. Okay. But this is obviously not the full story, because we have to account for the workers who did not finish the study, and they fall into one of 3 categories. So you have workers who wore the suit for at least 2 weeks. They decided then that they wanted to leave the study. So they gave it a fair chance. They wore it long enough to get a sense for whether it was right for them and right for their job. And they ultimately decided that they did not want to continue using the exosuit. You also have workers that left the field study within the first 2 weeks for reasons related to the Apex. Now, this is the trickiest bucket. It's a bit of a mixed bag. You have some individuals who wore the suit for a week and a half. They gave it a fair chance, and they decided, hey, this is not for me, or this is not for my job. You also have some individuals that wore the suit for less than a day and decided, actually, I don't want to participate in this study, or I realized I don't really like anything else touching my body. And so they dropped out much sooner, before they ever really got to a steady state. So it's a bit tricky to know what to do with this group, whether they should be included or excluded. I will cover how we deal with this in just a moment. But first, let me talk about the third bin. The last group is individuals who left the study before doing a survey and for reasons completely unrelated to the Apex. So many of these are high turnover jobs. These are individuals who may have left the job altogether, been transferred to a different department. They provided no data as to whether they accepted or did not accept the device. So they needed to be excluded from the study for that reason. We ended up coming up with 2 ways of calculating user acceptance. There's a low-end estimate that includes every person, even those people that put the device on for 30 minutes and decided, hey, I don't want to volunteer for this after all. If we calculate user acceptance this way, we estimate about 69% user acceptance. On the flip side, we can also have a high-end estimate that takes the perspective of, if somebody wasn't willing to wear a device for at least 2 weeks, to get to the point where they really gave it a real chance and got a sense for whether it would work for them and they could get adjusted to this new technology, this new body-worn system, then we excluded them. And if we calculate user acceptance this way, we ended up with 78%. So that's where we get our 70 to 80% user acceptance numbers from. This is with the Apex One and with good implementation. And we think that this is really good for an emerging safety technology, and particularly strong relative to what we've seen and heard across the industry. But what about the other 20 to 30% of users that didn't accept the Apex? What were some of the issues that they had? Well, there were some things that we can't control. Some issues we ran into were related to the safety culture at certain workplaces or lack of management support. There are certainly some individuals who just don't think they need anything. There's some young folks who have never had a musculoskeletal injury before who just say, I don't want any help, I'm fine. And there are some people that just don't like new things touching their body. But there are some issues that we can control, that we can impact. I've underlined here thermal comfort, because that was the most common barrier we ran into with Apex One. This is heat retention due to the backpack component or due to the thigh sleeves, where heat is trapped underneath. An individual said that heat retention was too much for them to want to continue wearing the suit or wearing it all day long. We had some individuals run into issues with pressure points, particularly around the armpits. So in Apex One, the shape of the shoulder strap during forward reaching could sometimes cause pressure points for certain people's bodies. And then some individuals said that the height of the clutch on the back of the device did not provide for comfortable seating in high back chairs. So we spent the last 2 years redesigning every component of the suit to improve thermal comfort, physical comfort, ease of use, and scalability. The device, Apex 2, has the same quasi-passive back assist capabilities as Apex 1, but it's 25% lighter. It has a 50% thinner clutch, which allows for more comfort during seated postures, especially in high back chairs or in forklifts. It has an improved shape design, strap shape design, to improve comfort during reaching and mitigate those pressure points that I talked about earlier. We added a quick loosening thigh sleeve. that helps with thermal comfort. We reduced the surface area on the back by 50% by adding a ventilated panel, 40% reduction in surface area on the thighs, and overall just a much better fit for men and women of different body sizes and shapes. And so we expect that with these improvements, the Apex 2 will see even higher user acceptance than the 70 to 80% that we've been seeing with Apex 1. And we have a lot of anecdotal evidence at this point to back that up. We took the Apex 2 pre-product devices out to workers who had already been using the Apex 1. We asked them to wear the suits and then to provide their feedback. And these are the types of things they had to say.
I can actually sit in this chair comfortably and lean back without the leaning forward for that little ball from the previous one. I think it's amazing. I like everything from it being more breathable, more comfortable around the chest, easy to take off. It's great.
A lot lighter, it's more breathable, which working inside in a warehouse.
Where did you find where the heat was concentrated in the last Apex?
For me, it was the leg straps. The back a little bit, but mainly the leg straps. But I have barely sweated this one at all.
I like it very much. I think if we had to scale 1 to 10, the old one, I would probably give it like a 7. This one, I would give it a 10. It was light, breathable, and very easy access and able to take it off.
I can actually sit in this.
So the last thing I want to say is that I think high and repeatable user acceptance is one of the final barriers that the exo field needs to overcome in order to achieve more widespread use, in order to roll this out and have it impacting more people's lives more broadly. This is also the key, really, to getting to the point where we get these large-scale, long-term studies to empirically test the effects on musculoskeletal disorders and injury rates. I think this data is going to come from natural experiments, meaning companies that are already adopting this technology to support their workforce, where they're rolling out thousands of suits and we can track injury rates over multiple years. High and repeatable user acceptance is also the key to exotech just impacting more people's lives. These are two of my favorite quotes from Apex users because they exemplify the technology and the impact that it can have not just at work, but also at home. One individual talking about it allowing her to do more activities after work rather than just go home and pass out from being exhausted. And the other talking about how he can go home and actually be in daddy mode, meaning play with his kids with less pain. So in conclusion, I just want to reiterate that based on our experiences and our data, high user acceptance of exos is possible and it is repeatable. If you can get these 3 things right: comfort, assistance, and ease of use. And if you accept the hard truth that as of today, this may not be true tomorrow, this may not be true 5 or 10 years in the future, but as of today, exos are a product and a service. And if you want to achieve user acceptance, you need to excel at both. Thank you.